Dr. Power, the guests have arrived.
Oh, thanks, Castle. Hey, folks, come on in and join me, and two seats over here. Good. So glad you could join me. It's week 3, and we're getting underway on that. I had a good meeting with the alumni in Toronto and Ottawa over the past week, and again, I apologize for my lack of great involvement over the week, but certainly we'll make up for it over this weekend, and I got things cleaned up before I left, of course. But it was a good trip, and we need to build alumni. Alumni is so important. The network is so important for you folks, for all of us to have a strong alumni. We have about 9,000 graduates floating around out there, many in China and Shanghai and Beijing, and it's just it's troubling that we don't have that close relationship for you with your colleagues in Shanghai and Beijing, because the network, the ability to stay in touch and to do things together and drop in and pay visits. So this is a step towards that, trying to build that sort of network a little bit better. Assignment number 2, you have submitted. I'm underway this weekend on the marking process for assignment number 2. Correction, assignment number 1, rather. Simple little exercise. I don't anticipate any great challenges doing it. Assignment number 2 coming up in another couple of weeks. Due again at midnight on that Sunday. 2,000 words. Here's the full Monty. You have a cover page, title page, cover page, an index, an executive summary, normal body introduction, conclusion. The appendixes don't count, so it's only a 2,000 word paper, so it's really succinct, the essence, the high level, interesting stuff I want to see, not a lot of the history of it all. And then the appendixes, and those don't count towards the 2,000, but as many appendixes you see are interesting. I love to read, drop them in there, and that would be helpful. Week 3, so in week 1 we had a strategist perspective to get your mind open if I can and think with left and right brain, to have a good sense of looking at the other side of the hand and challenge hypothesis and test. We went through a number of different concepts and notions and started you down that track. This past week I've had you look at a toolbox with about 40 some odd tools in there. The important ones, I think, in the little power handbook that you have. There's an inverted axis on the Boston matrix. I'm sorry, but when we proofread it, I didn't see the figures against the narrative, and they said they changed it on the next iteration. It hasn't been done yet. But there are 40 there. That's more than you'll need throughout the program. And then for those interested, you don't have to. For those interested, in the bonus section, there's another bunch of models and tools in there, about 100, with a brief explanation of how they work. You may find those of interest. I think one of the concepts I'd like to talk for you before we get underway in the paper today was the notion of flat tax. And certainly we have this tax fatigue, and last week we talked about, again, just another way of a Google tax coming in with this globalist world that we're heading down that road, and I'll talk some more about some other taxes coming in today. And so in some jurisdictions like Hong Kong, and certainly almost in every past presidential election in the States, one of the candidates has put forth the notion, the concept, that there should be a flat tax. And a flat tax is rather simple. It simply says that, and you put the numbers in that you like, but let's say anything over $30,000 you'll pay a tax on. Under $30,000, folks, you don't have to pay tax. It's a fixed percentage, let's say 15–18%, and so if you make $100,000, you pay $18,000 in tax on that $1 over the 30 towards the 100. In folks that make $40,000, and only $10,000 of that would be taxable income, and they pay 15% of $10,000, so they pay $1,500 in tax. The beauty of that system would be is that I don't have to sit up, and you don't have to sit up on the tax return month and pulling all your papers and documents, think of the dead time that produces, taking it down to accountant, think of all the dead time that produces, lawyers, tax appeals, tax systems, the growing bureaucracy in there that edits and monitors all our claims and arm wrestles over your deductions, and nobody really understands the tax code. It's just grown like topsy with bits and pieces. And this is so simple. We simply throw that all out. We cut down the plant facilities, etc., for the Revenue Canada people down to a very, very core bunch. The savings alone are astronomical. They can be put to other things. I have a saying that this sort of expenditure of money doesn't produce any potatoes. Those funds would be better produced as your time and my time be better produced doing things that are more productive than this filing of returns. And I would say this, that if one of the American presidents was successful in bringing in a flat tax, and I think Cruz, I could stand corrected in this, I think Cruz was one of the candidates that suggested this, on the Republican side of the House this time round, but it might have been Ron Paul. If it was to come into place, would you stay in Canada if you could go to the States and work from there and just pay 15% tax? And so it's if they did it, what I'm getting at is we'd have no choice in Canada but to ratchet our tax down lower and get in step with that. Otherwise, people are going to leave them because we're portable. We can go down there and work. I can go down there and work. And so flat tax is something that's worth considering, and maybe it's an idea whose time has come. I don't know, but maybe worth a discussion this week. So let's look at flat tax this week if we can. So in the paper, what do we have? Glasses up here. In Ottawa, Trudeau has a government economic advisory council, and they've published some of their findings. There's a bunch of things in here, but the thing that I found one of the interesting little turns was they make a point that the research predicts that as many as half of Canada's 9 million middle-class jobs, one half of Canada's total middle-class jobs, 9 million, one half of them, are susceptible to being automated over the next 5 to 10 years. And he said that's a double what's happened in the last 5 years. And so there's this exponential drive to automate robotics, to do the sort of things we're talking about in this class. And can you imagine the stress and strain as we hollow out the middle class in Canada and take 50% of it away? They either have to retool or they go in the garbage heap. And that's a big social problem coming our way. And are we preparing for it in our businesses and our schools on how do we retool these folks? And I read another article the other day, and I was thinking of something that railroads could consider that Canada needs in order to accommodate and start closing the gap on this Internet of Everything, 200,000 coders. And back in the 70s, I recall taking what was called a basic coding course in those days. It was very simple. It was if not then, and zeros and ones, and the total outcome of that whole course, as I recall, was making the game of hangman, that you could ask some letters, and if the hangman got hung if you didn't guess the proper word. But that was my basic programming skills back at 40, 50 years ago. And so anyway, what a wonderful opportunity for Royal Roads to go to out of the red, highly competitive ocean that we now fight in with other institutions for those BCom candidates, etc. And here's a perfectly big blue ocean, example blue ocean with very little competition in Canada. There's a crying need. Why don't we have a bachelor of some program in coding and possibly a master's in internet technology, something of that line, and maybe even within this program there could be a course or two and do a stream in internet technology, because it's the direction we're going, and those are the ones who are going to get the jobs. This whole middle class cleaned out. This is what the skills that they're going to have to start thinking about getting. So that's something we could talk about. What's going to happen in the middle class as this happens. Conference Board expects a rebound in the LNG industry. They say last year the pre-tax losses were $1.6 billion for this current year for the Canada natural gas industry, $1.6 billion. And last year they had $1.7 billion worth of tax losses. Those are big losses, but they think it's good news in the sense that because the price of LNG is down so low, many people are pulling back on the LNG facilities, and I think it's an opportunity for Canada to get its Pacific Northwest LNG project up and off the ground. Do you recall that one? I think it came with, I stand to be corrected if I said 160, 190, 130 conditions precedent that had to be fulfilled, and some conditions subsequent that had to be fulfilled prior to getting approval for putting this in place. And next to that, I see TransCanada Corporation is offering a lower price for long-term contracts to use to Alberta shippers moving the gas back and forth. So that augurs well. We may see the price of gas softening, LNG gas softening across Canada, which is good for us and helps too hard for the companies. Activists, this is a symptom really. They're talking about the small town 60 miles to the east, is it? 60 miles to the west of Toronto. Small little municipality needed more water supplies for drink for a small municipality. And so they had to go into a bidding war for this new well system that was there against Nestlé's. Nestlé's has a contract to take our water, bottle it, and sell it globally. And Nestlé's won, and they got the water. And so it's simply a symptom of the challenge that we've talked about in this class. We have 25% of the world's fresh water, and when global multinational companies want that, when other nations want that, those nations like China are on balance, basically dry. They need water. California needs water. It's a challenge for us we're going to have to be facing, and this is just a symptom of what happens when the two needs clash, Canadians versus external clash, and what can we do about it? And so the symptom, yeah, we can talk about that particular story, but more importantly is how are we going to protect our water? Have we given too much away under NAFTA already? NAFTA suggests that if we start treating water as some sort of a product, then the gates are open to empty the Great Lakes and for us to use that. We have the United Nations making the point that water belongs to all mankind. Canada can't control that. They're almost making the point that it should belong and controlled by this new global order. And so let's look at the water today in Canada and what we should be doing about it. Lots of Trump, but frankly I'm getting tired of Trump, and I'll talk about that in a minute. China, U.S. One of the WikiLeaks things that came to bear, without getting political, but what was important in it was it said Clinton suggests privately that the U.S. could ring China with missiles, and one of the leaked emails, and the WikiLeaks thing's not important. What's important in that is just the mindset, the militant mindset of Americans and others that we have to ring countries. And if you're going to ring China with missile defense things, don't be surprised if China becomes more active. We did that with the NATO folks coming in close onto the Russian borders with the consequential results we got with the Crimea after and things of that nature. And I'm not picking sides, but I'm just saying that if you poke the bear, either side pokes the bear, things come back. And here's what's happening here. Right now, as we it goes on, this idea here, the idea that comes up in a minute of Yemen the other day, that we had a first fired upon from missiles from the shoreline onto an American warship. No response. Today they responded, or last week they responded, and went in with 3 Tomahawk missiles and knocked out the sites. At the same time, the Chinese and Russians have now moved their ships into the same area of Yemen, and accidents can take place. But you can see this tension, flashpoints are building up around the world, that we as strategists, we need to watch, because it can impact the Gulf of Hormuz. 1/3 of the world's oil comes through that's right there. And if that gets closed or some sort of flare-up, then the price of oil goes back up to $150, $200 a barrel. That makes a difference in your business and my business, and so we need to watch this as we do it. They make the argument here that couldn't China keep North Korea on a string as one of the tension points. Kim Jong-un is constantly beating on his chest and sending on missiles and threatening to do this and that and putting satellites up over us. And we turn to the Chinese saying, well, you folks feed them, you supply their resources, can you turn off the tap for a while and get them back into step? And of course China says we don't have control and not anxious to do that, but the reality is it's in China's best interest. The more Kim Jong-un is yapping like a yapping dog and keeping the Americans busy and threatening, the more time that China has to push on in the South China Sea and the South East China Sea to get its islands in place and to take control of Spratly Islands and other oil resource islands out in that area. Last week we saw the Thai Monarch passed away after 70 years sitting on the throne. They reported he was the oldest, longest reigning monarch, and so Queen Elizabeth must be close to that. He was 88 when he passed away. But the interesting little sidebar here is that the Crown Prince, his son, who's been married 3 times, a bit of a playboy, and seems to fit the mold of Kim Jong-un, and a bit of a playboy. And there's lots of distress in this kingdom, that in the Thailand, that this individual is going to take over. But in that country, it's not free speech. You can go to jail for criticizing the monarchy. So, interesting story there. We talked here about U.S. strikes Yemen with rebels with missiles. A report came out on these new drone cars. Consumers not too excited over self-driving cars. Car makers are optimistic than the public, according to the study. And so Ford, Volvo, GM, Uber, etc., are all reading this survey with interest. It was done by the Kelly Blue Book people, which give you the price for cars, if you want to know what a red book and a blue book and what your price of your car is worth. But they interviewed 2,264 American citizens and asked them in different demographic, different age groups, what they thought. But the balance of them, they prefer to drive themselves. Depends somewhat on age, but they like the idea of driving. Interesting in that report, as it came through, was that young people aren't driving with the same frequency that when I turned 16 couldn't wait to get a license. But increasingly, more and more young people saying, I don't need a car and I'll use the transit system, and getting out of that, which is one of the little pieces that came out of the study. I guess the whole study was basically it's a bit of a surprise that people weren't in a rush to go to level 5, that basically you don't even need windows on the car. The thing just takes you where you want to go, and there's no driver, no foot pedals, no whatever, level 5. And most people are happy up with level 2. Like my car has got all the sensors left and right and people backing up and things go on and bells clank. But not that next step that some other way is going to, other than me, is going to drive the machine. And so, do you think that's true? Are you excited about the possibility of getting a drone car? I can tell you at my age, I can't wait to get one of those things where I can just step out and move ahead. A story right next to that, another study came in that drivers over age of 85 are the fastest growing segment of North American automobile users. And I guess part of that whole thing, and the reason for that, they say, is that ages 70 to 74, sort of folks just slightly younger than me, have the most injuries, most deaths out of all this. Not because they're bad drivers, but it's because that when you're involved in an accident, you're susceptible to injury, and medical complications are far greater in older people. But we could look at old people driving, I guess, and what do you think of that? So I looked at the Globe and the papers like that today, and I have to say the Fourth Estate is becoming, in my mind, at least during this election period, everything I pick up and open and watch these days, it's getting more like a tabloid, more like entertainment. It's not news any longer. I mean, it doesn't tell you what's going on in Yemen so much. It doesn't tell you what's going on in Rwanda. It doesn't tell you what's going on in space travel that we talked about last week or the week before, about the move by Obama to get up there by 2030, or the idea of lasers driving rockets to the moon. Where's all the information coming from? We need to understand some of that too, not just the Trump-Clinton mix-up. So I've gone to a couple books I like. This one is called Bloomberg Business Week. I get it weekly, enjoy it. Quite a nice book. It's just full of meaty stuff on businesses, and a little longer articles worth reading. Keeps you up to date. I also like the Foreign Affairs Journal. It's a little blue one, thick. I couldn't realize about the second year I was reading, I couldn't understand why I read every word of it, and I just loved it. Couldn't wait to get my hands on it until it finally dawned on me it wasn't the normal 10 or 12 inch font. It's 16-inch font with lots of white space. And so their target market are old farts like me, and so as a result, you'll find older people very much enjoy the Foreign Affairs Journal. But I commend it to you. 6 to 10 pages in any talk. So I just talked about Yemen, the Houthi, and the idea of being supported by Iran versus the Saudis, and what's going on there. If you want to get into that sort of world and understand the players and what's happening and peel the onion as to what's underneath it, it's a great little book to have, and it comes out once every 2 months to travel around with you. But it's a great little read. This particular is talking in terms of the smart person's guide to paying taxes, arising, of course, from Donald Trump's recent bout, and we just talked about $1.6 billion of losses in the oil and gas sector in Canada. Well, those are losses they can carry forward. But this article's got 3 or 4 pages on folks that have some money coming in. Here are some snippets from candidates' tax returns that offer lessons in obscure tax planning strategies. And so, as you know, there's either tax evasion or tax avoidance. And tax evasion is a no-no. You go to jail. Tax avoidance, you're entitled to go right up to the letter of the law. Whatever it says you can do, you can do. And that's what Trump did, and that's what this whole article about in Bloomberg is saying. If you want to make sure you're not missing any of the deductions you're entitled to, it lays out some for you to have a look at, which is interesting. There's an article in here, and I'm following about 20 potential flashpoints around the world. One is India and Pakistan, and why it's important is both nations have nuclear weapons. And the other part of that, of course, is particularly Pakistan has got some turbulence internally. Unlike Modi in the south, Pakistan's got some turbulence that the government could be gone tomorrow, and folks like the Taliban could be taking over, ISIS taking over, and they get control of the nuclear weapons. Then what? And so it's an area we need to watch. It has big implications if there's a regime change in Pakistan. But this is about a fight that took place, and it's constant fighting back and forth over the Kashmir, and 19 Indian soldiers were killed in the last clash. There's only measured responses from India that doesn't want it to blow up out of the way. But Kashmir would very much like to come back and be part of India, according to this. Worth watching. Interesting little tidbits. Toyota introduced a $400 robot designed to sit in a coffee cup to keep you awake when you drive. It sits and talks to you if you want it. Google unveiled its first smartphone for $649 with a talking speaker for $129. FBI arrested a security agency contractor for see whether or not he stole classified computer codes from the agency and passed them along. The Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal by the Washington Redskins because on their helmets they have a picture in that country called Indians. They had a picture of an Indian on the side of their hat, and it was objected to by the First Nation groups in America. Colombia voters, we talked last week about the FARC and rejecting the peace after a 52-year war. Auto sales are down 5.5% in the States. Ford posted the biggest drop. But again, these businesses are going to Mexico, and Mexico's attracting both from Canada and from the States. The automobile industry is growing there neatly because the factor endowments are there, the budget price, talented labor is there, and the tax is such that that's where they're heading. New York homeless population, this is bad. 60,000 people live on the streets. 60,000 live on the streets in New York. The British pound dropped to a 31-year low to $1.27 against the American dollar. Great article in here on wind is the new corn. And as you know, in the States for all too many years subsidized, farmers have been encouraged to grow corn. It gets ground down, made into ethanol, and so we grow food to burn it up in our cars. And now what they're finding is that wind has taken that over. They say it's such a boon. It's the fastest growing source of electricity in the United States. It's transforming low-income rural areas. And think of Alberta when I tell you the story. Richard Wilson, one of the farmers down there, he makes his living now just simply leasing his land for 34 turbines. Each turbine, he gets between $7,000 and $10,000 per year for each turbine. It stopped him. Otherwise, he was going to have to sell off some of his 60,000 acre cattle and wheat ranch that had been in his family since '48. But this has been a boon for him. Other people are now in a position they can operate the farm for another generation to pass it along. He said, I used to raise corn and soybeans and cattle, but now I don't. He leases his farm to others to cultivate, and he simply takes his checks off the wind power. Interesting thing by that, of course, is even though it's harvesting not corn and soybeans, it's harvesting wind. Never miss an opportunity. The government stepped in, and now it's reassessing all those homes that have wind farms, and they've increased their land values by about 70% to make sure they get more revenues out of them. That's why we need a flat tax. It also keeps lower prices for power across rural America. And Warren Buffett's in now with Mid-American Energy. He's in there and he's negotiating these leases, and he proposes to build $3.5 billion worth of wind series farms across Iowa. And if they can do it in the central plains of America, why can't we do this in our prairies and consider the idea of wind farms going there in a big way and renting it back to the to the energy companies? Colombia, we talked about that, the FARC already. Trump hurts the Mexican peso that helps the Mexicans. The idea of building a border and renegotiating NAFTA with the Mexicans has driven down the value of the Mexican peso in comparison to the American dollar by about 25%. But that's been a good thing for the American workers, getting American dollars in California and shipping their American dollars back home to family. It's a 25% boom to them, so they're very happy with Trump. Another Internet of Everything. We've had Airbnb, now you can do the same thing for your cars, where we only use the cars 95% of the time they're not used. This is a new franchise that you can sign up. There's a number of them. Drivey is the lead one, and you can sign on and use your car and rent it out to other people to use it during the day, and make some money. He charges about $30 a day to use it after the insurance is paid and the matchmaking fee to put the two people together with the app. And so far, Drivey's got 38,000 cars on the road in Europe using this system. Needle-free injections. A new patent has been announced. It's an air pressure, piston-driven. Diabetics, insulin. My daughter's one of those, and since 18 months she's been a diabetic. And so every day of her life she takes 3 and 4 injections in the run of a week, daily, and 2 or 3 often a day. And it's amazing. And here's this air pressure that you just hold up against your skin, press the button, it drives it in, and you get your vaccines and things this way with a disposable cartridge. And it seems to me when I was back in the military, but somewhere in the early 60s, we had that. We used to line up like animals, go down, they had a gun with a tube and put up against our arm and gave us a volt of something. In those days, I wasn't as thoughtful, I guess, as to what they volted us with, but they gave us a shot of something. But anyway, needle-free injections are coming on. They call it a new invention, as I say. I think I saw this thing or something similar 50 years ago. But it's a piston-driven device to deliver vaccines. Deutsche Bank, we've talked about. They've done stress tests on 51 European banks. 51 of them have found to be floundering and having difficulty. The lead in this is the Deutsche Bank. It's just closed up a settlement with the Americans, I think somewhere like $6 billion to round it off, but their net free capital is under strain. And understand that Deutsche Bank is not just a bank, but in Germany the Deutsche Bank is almost Germany. It's very much integrated into the German economy, and so it can't fail without severe consequences. But it's got a 5-year plan. They are cutting 9,000 jobs. They're slashing almost $4 billion in costs, trying to get. They're pruning the rosebush, trying to get back into field. Their net income dropped from 18 million euros. Yeah, dropped to 18 million euros from 796 million euros, from 796 down to 18, which is quite a drop. They had a $3.9 billion loss in 2008, and it's been continuing every year. Chancellor Merkel, of course, is involved in this with the election coming up next year, and she's watching very much and under pressure by the bank people saying we may need a bailout, and she's making it very clear, particularly the election coming up, there will be no bailout, and if that's the case, then maybe it has to be a merger and acquisition with another bank, or possibly some sort of fundraising, a capital raising event to get some money in, but I don't know who put money in with the thing going down. But watch for that, because if that bank was to do something untoward, it could be a catalyst to cause a lot of havoc in the European Union as a whole. And equally, it's not the only bank. The Italian bank and the Spanish banks are in the same sort of position, just not quite the same numbers. So there's lots going over there to watch for the banking system in the European Union. Vancouver even made the talk here about the prices were up 31% in August from a year earlier. The folks, the United Nations have declared the world's most bubbly. Home prices in the city are 40 times the annual rents, compared with 20 times in San Francisco, and that 15% tax we put on is helping. And the final thing in here I guess we'll talk about is another article. Got some lengthy articles on different topics. This one's on the mosquito, Zika's mosquito that's taking place down in Europe, down in southern parts of the States, and the danger that is and how it's spreading. I won't go into that, but it does raise the better issue for us is pandemics, that we need a pandemic plan both in your home and in your business, because the hospitals, if we had a pandemic of some nature, Asian flu or some sort of a nation thing like that, the hospitals aren't big enough or equipped to take care of us. You have to be able to take care of yourself. And so it's time to think a little bit more like an earthquake kit, that you have a pandemic plan for your organization. So as leaders in your organization, it's time to think about that. So anyway, I hope you found that a good session. Enough stuff in there to have meaty. Next week I look forward to receiving maybe some questions from you. Simply call it the Smokehat Session questions in the header so I don't discard it. And I'll bring a few along, and you ask me some thoughts, and I'll post them up here, and we can lead to some discussions about it. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying the course. I certainly am. Sorry about missing this last little week a little bit, but we're back in step. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.